In this video, I'm gonna talk about the one thing that you need to know before you start any romantic relationship. The one thing that if that goes unchecked, if you're unaware that you have it, and if it's unhealed, it will slowly sabotage and maybe even kill your relationship and set you up for heartbreak and pain. Hi everyone, my name is Christine. I help people navigate through difficult life transitions, trauma healing, and transformation. So today I thought I'm going to talk a little bit about the number one reason why relationships fail when we have unhealed trauma. At least that was true for me. And I moved to Bali about 16 months ago in the first place because of a really traumatic breakup of a 10-year relationship. And I did not know this entire time, although I met him when I already had started to do my inner work. I had already been to India and I started things like meditation, Vipassana retreats. I had started to come into contact with my soul, my higher self, my guides, with my intuition. The inner child had started showing up. I had already started to do a little bit of work, but I did not know at that time how much unhealed trauma I really had, and especially what kind. And then the whole 10 years when we were together, I did like full-time healing work, inner work, and trauma healing. And it took me some years to even understand that I had trauma because I did so much spiritual healing, like from the spiritual or from the soul level, like, yes, inner child healing, but also I started ancestral healing. I started past life stuff. So it was not very clear to me the first few years that I had a stack actually of complex trauma, developmental trauma, like commonly known as childhood trauma, and especially attachment trauma. And this is what I'm going to talk about briefly in this video, and I will maybe do more. But this is the one thing that I would strongly recommend you to look at before you get yourself into your next relationship. And then maybe you set yourself up for another heartbreak and loss, that like the one I had. I'm just going to briefly talk about my own attachment trauma as far as I'm aware of it. And this comes on top of the ongoing complex childhood PTSD or developmental trauma that just happens when you grow up with emotionally dysfunctional parents or narcissistic parents or abusive parents that are traumatized themselves, that haven't done any inner healing work. And I'm not going into this right now. But attachment trauma happens when that attachment to our primary attachment figure, which is usually the mother or the father or both, when there is some sort of rupture. And in my case, for example, and this is interesting because I already had years and years ago, I did a regression and I had the memory coming up and I actually re-experienced myself as an infant, maybe about 2 years old, where I was lying in the crib in the darkness. It was just black all around me and I was crying for my mother, and no one came, and I was completely alone lying in the darkness. And in that moment, I could feel such a fear of death. I thought I was going to die because I was crying. I was helpless. I couldn't move myself. And no one came. And in that moment, that part in me thought, or not just that part of me, that whole of me, that 2-year-old me that I was back then, thought I will die. Because babies and small infants, they are completely helpless. You know, when you abandon a baby somewhere and you just walk away, what happens to that baby if no one else comes and picks it up? We are completely helpless as babies and infants. And in that moment when something like this happens in the first few years of your life, that's a preverbal trauma. This is another thing that I need to briefly mention. It goes directly into your subconscious mind. It goes directly into the somatic level of the body. Later you will forget all about it. And you can't remember anything. But that trauma and what the consequences are of that trauma are still completely there. They are in you, and they will run on autopilot, and they will impact your life, all areas of life maybe, and especially your relationships, and especially your romantic relationships. So what happened to me was that my mother was in hospital for about 2 weeks, and I assume that I had my crib next to the bed of my parents, but that time when she had to go to hospital, my crib was put into the living room, into a separate room, and my father was a teacher, and he I guess he didn't want to be woken up by my crying, so they put me in that separate room, and he called his own mother, my grandmother, to stay with us for these 2 weeks and to basically take care of me. Problem was that this was not a very, warm, loving woman. I mean, my father himself was very, very broken, very traumatized, and she was like very, very, how should I say that? She was the reason for that, not the only reason, but a big reason for his trauma. So as far as I could piece it together is that, and I heard this story from my mother then years and years and years later when I was already a grown up, how she got really annoyed with me because I was crying, my mommy, I was crying and crying for my mother this whole time, and she got really annoyed. So I don't know if she eventually came and picked me up, but not very warm or loving or soothing me, more like annoyed, like shut up, or if she came at all. And my father did not come. He just either didn't hear me or he couldn't be bothered. So he didn't come to me either. So I was lying in that room as a 1.5, 2 years old, crying for my mother in the darkness, maybe for hours, night after night after night. So if you already know that for some reason you were left crying as a baby, because there's this horrific trend of generations even of parents who read the smart books about how to let your baby cry, that it gets stronger or more independent and less needy and whatever, which is just unbelievable if you ask me. If you already know that, then listen up, because this is very true for you too. Because again, when we are babies, we don't have that rational mind. We can't think like this. They're busy, or they read the wrong stupid books, or they are not here, or whatever, and they don't really mean it, and I'm not gonna die, but it's fine. No, we don't think like that. We cry, and usually the attachment figure, the mother, the father, comes and picks us up and soothes us. In functional families, in healthy families, this is what happens, and this how you form a healthy attachment to your attachment figures, and therefore you form a healthy trust in the world, because it's a repetition. You cry, something is wrong, and they come and they help you and they soothe you and they feed you and whatever, and then you know that you're taken care of, and you know that everything is okay, and you know that you're not alone, and that you're supported, and that you're loved. And from this foundation you can build your beliefs in the world and a sense of stability and security within yourself. But with that kind of attachment trauma, some sort of early rupture, especially when it's preverbal, then you will not have that basic foundation of that sense of trust and security. in the world around you because the people you depended on, for whatever reason, did not come. They let you cry. So in that moment, I experienced a complete fear of death. I will die. And I mean, I'm talking about really re-experience that in regression. And then later on, when I healed these deepest layers of this attachment trauma after the breakup, I could feel it on the emotional and somatic level, and it was intense. So, and this is just my experience. I'm not saying it's universally true, but this is what I know. And in that moment, also beliefs formed like, no one cares about me. My own father doesn't care. He doesn't come. He doesn't care if I live or die. And I guess I didn't understand where my mother was. She was always there, and then she was not there. So I don't think I made the connection like, oh yeah, she's in hospital and she can't come. So I must have thought that my mother abandoned me too. In that moment, I formed that very primary, very strong abandonment trauma. And I think abandonment trauma and attachment trauma somewhat go hand in hand. At least they did for me. And things like, I'm not, no one cares about me. No one loves me. I'm not important enough that someone comes and helps me and takes care of me. So from that very basic source, that source of that trauma that happened in that moment, so many limiting beliefs, if you want to call it like that, branched off. And they all formed in that moment, in these nights where I was left crying. And then they went directly into the subconscious mind. They went directly into my somatic, into my body, somatic level. Of course, the emotional, and deeply embedded in the psyche too. Like things like, no one loves me and they don't care. And my own family doesn't care about me. My own father doesn't care about me. I think that was also the beginning of my father wound. That is also a huge reason, especially for women, for relationship problems, just like attachment trauma. So that happened when I was an infant and they left me alone crying. So in that moment, that rupture started of the primary attachment figure that I had. That was my mother that was not there. And the second attachment figure, that was my father, that didn't bother to come and help me or soothe me or pick me up or anything. The problem is that our parents, again, they're necessary for our survival when we are little. And we don't know. We don't understand what's going on. So that part in us really thinks that we die. They don't come, so we die. And I think in that moment, and maybe that was even the first trauma I had. I know they had something in the womb. That's a whole nother topic here. You can have trauma in the womb. But that's the furthest back I could go with my inner work and with regression work and meditation and all of that to retrieve these memories from that when I was like 1.5, 2 years old. So that I think that must have been my first trauma, and all that other stuff stacked on top of that later on. So again, that's the attachment, the preverbal attachment trauma, the primary rupture I had, and the first one, where that part in me, that infant that I was, somewhat split off. I talked about that before, that when there is trauma, when we are children, then most likely there is a part that just splits off with that overwhelming emotion, that fear, that whatever it is, because we can't feel it. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. It threatens our survival. So we just like freeze, or we split it off. And that part gets exiled. It gets exiled within the landscape of our soul, within our psyche, however you want to call it. And then we forget about it. we just grow up and we walk through life, and we developed our coping mechanisms and our survival strategies and all this stuff, emotions we don't want to feel, numbing behaviors, and especially these limiting beliefs that formed all these years back when that thing happened first. So in my case, like, no one loves me, my own parents don't love me, no one cares about me, they don't care if I live or die. And that it was almost like a death imprint, that fear of death. No one comes, so I'm gonna die. That was a death imprint that followed me around my entire life. And that is a very, very heavy energy, that is a very heavy frequency within you that is just there and you're not aware of it. But regardless, it will attract always more situations, circumstances, people, relationships where that primary pattern maybe is repeated over and over again, like abandonment, like I will be abandoned. My parents abandoned me. My father abandoned me. My mother abandoned me. I'm not worthy, apparently, that someone stays with me. So there is that primary belief, limiting belief formed, I will always be abandoned. And then you run around through life with your mommy and daddy issues on top of that, your attachment trauma, and deep down that belief runs on autopilot that you're not worthy, that someone stays with you, that you will be abandoned anyway. And guess what? You will be abandoned again. Over and over and over. Because that belief was formed when you were so little, and then you were not aware of it and you forgot about it. And it just runs on autopilot and it runs on autopilot and it keeps repeating and reattracting and recreating situations and circumstances and relationships where that primary trauma or rupture is repeated. So if you go through a terrible breakup, if you lost someone, if someone left you, like for me, that breakup 16 months ago, that was extremely traumatic. Then it's probably not the primary root cause or reason or anything. There must be something deeper. Usually there is something that happened much, much, much earlier in your childhood. Maybe a kind of attachment trauma like the one I had. And even if you didn't have attachment trauma in that way, what I had, like, or your parents let you just cry and cry and cry and they didn't come for you. Even if you have just developmental trauma or complex trauma, childhood PTSD and things like that, then it's still way enough to keep recreating these patterns and these problems in all areas of our lives. But in my experience, the worst was that early attachment trauma. Because from here on out, I had this exiled infant that was scared to death to be alone, to be left alone, to be abandoned, and that needed someone to basically be with her, to replace that primary attachment figure. And because of the ongoing situation in how I was growing up and the situation at home where I did not feel good, where I did not feel really safe, where I knew that something is not good and somehow wrong and all of that, I then tried to escape that, but then I went out and I immediately always focused on other people. Consciously, of course, because I wanted friends and, peers and groups and also romantic partners and boyfriends. That's normal, but there was always this part in me that needed someone else in order to feel safe. And that part in me was so traumatized, so scared, so clinging on to that other person, so desperate, so needy, that sooner or later it would always come out. There is a trigger. And that part would come out and freak out. Like, for example, in my last in all relationships I ever had, but in my last one, which was the longest and the most important and the most dramatic one to end, every time when he wanted to do something alone, when he said, I have a business trip for a few days, or I'm going to visit my family in the south for like a week or two, that part in me started to panic. Oh my God, he's abandoning me. I'm going to be alone. What and I started to be so, I don't know, so scared and then angry and triggered. And I tried to make him feel guilty for going somewhere and for leaving me alone. And my conscious adult self, of course, is like, what? Why do you make a big deal out of this? It's just a business trip. He wants to visit his family and friends. That's normal. And yes, of course, you have that, the conscious logical mind that tells you that. But it's still, you cannot imagine the power this inner traumatized exile parts, especially inner child parts, what the power they have over us, the power they have over our emotions. And in that moment when something is triggered, you react, you lash out, you get angry. Because that part in you screams, I don't want to be abandoned all over again. It threatens her survival. It really, really threatened her survival. Every time he left and he went somewhere, that part in me thought, basically, to say it simply, that part in me thought she's gonna die. So you can imagine that this is not very conducive for a normal, healthy relationship amongst adults, because that part is always there and she's so needy and she's so terrified of being alone. And that plays into the anxious attachment style. And I'm not going to get into this now in this video, but when you have attachment trauma, you probably have insecure attachment. And insecure attachment styles are usually the fearful avoidant or the disorganized one. Then you have the dismissive avoidant and you have the anxiously attached one. So, for example, in my case, I had that primary preverbal attachment trauma. And then I had the insecure attachment style of disorganized, because my father was very, very distant and emotionally absent and like not there. And when he showed up, he was volatile. He unleashed his rage on me. And I was scared of him. And the rest of the time he was not there. And he never told me that he loved me or he was proud of me or anything like that. And on the other side, my mother was very, very, very needy and anxiously attached herself. I guess she had the similar attachment trauma. So she was very, very, very emotionally and energetically and in all ways engulfing and intrusive and enmeshed and like really suffocating. And that created in me that disorganized attachment style of, on the one hand, because of my father, I was like, I want someone to love me. That creates that kind of anxiously attached, needy one, clingy one, like, please love me, because my daddy never loved me, so please, I need someone who loves me. And then when I had someone and we started to get closer, I could not stand it. I felt suffocated, like real intimacy was not possible. Real attunement was not possible. Emotional closeness was not possible because it reminded me of that suffocating, being invaded, being trapped, being engulfed feeling that I had because of my mother. So I was constantly bouncing back between these two extremes, and it creates that push-pull dynamics. If you have one of these, and this is simplified, of course, then you either lean towards the avoidant or towards the anxiously attached spectrum. And the disorganized or fearful avoidant, where it's always like either or, like a pendulum swinging between them, that creates the most pain, of course, because You just don't understand what's wrong with you. You don't understand why your relationships are always so problematic and why you are like this and why you just can't have a normal relationship and why it just, I don't know, why it just doesn't work out and why one breakup after the other and why do you then break up and have immediately the next relationship, or why are you constantly left and abandoned and then you're in pain and heartbreak again? It's really, 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 it creates a lot of pain, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of suffering. And if you are in this situation, or if you already had many failed relationships, if you recognize yourself in any of this, please, please do not get immediately again into the next relationship. You will set yourself up for the next heartbreak. I promise you, when you have not done any inner work, when you have not done any healing work, when you have not looked at your attachment trauma or your complex trauma, your developmental trauma, when you haven't done any kind of inner healing or inner child healing or reparenting work. This is so crucial. And I'm not saying that you have to be perfectly healed before you're allowed to have a partner again. That's not what I'm saying. But in my case, I had just started the inner healing work. I had no idea. I just briefly touched upon inner child healing. I had no idea how much trauma I had, let alone of attachment trauma or things like codependency or enmeshment. I had no idea. And then I was in a very, very uncertain phase of my life. I was very lost. I had just left Thailand behind, and my dream of living in paradise and being a scuba dive instructor after a few years had shattered. I was already 34, I had no idea where to go, what to do with my life. And then I met him. And then I had to go back to Germany, and I had a horrible situation there anyway. So I basically fled into his arms before I could really look at all my stuff, before I could really start to heal this. And then I am grateful for these 10 years we were together, because he was at my side. He supported me in every way so that I could do my healing work. But as we were already together, all the stuff would play out, and I was deeply, deeply unaware of it, despite doing already so much healing work. The inner child, the ancestral, the karmic stuff, the past life stuff. I did so much, countless healing sessions, plant medicine, vipassana retreats, meditations, regressions, you name it. And I had no idea how much all of these things and programs and wounds and beliefs were still running in the background, were running on autopilot, and how much they would negatively influence our relationship. So coming back to very recently, it's really very recent that I healed this and integrated this exiled, extremely terrified and traumatized inner infant part of me. And when the breakup happened, it was not just, and that's bad enough, the end of a 10-year relationship, the end of all hopes and dreams I had. I was convinced we are soulmates and we're gonna stay together forever. I lost overnight not only him, but my cat, my home, the life we had built together. And I had nothing and no one, and I moved to Bali. And it was I was still in shock. I think otherwise I wouldn't have managed to survive through the first weeks and months. And this entire time, even when 2 months later, I got the email that the breakup is really final, because it was first not very clear. And then it took me a year, almost a year, to accept that, because this entire time, while I was grieving, while I was doing all the stuff here for healing and the classes and the sessions and the workshops and the this and the that, this entire time I had this huge part in me that was basically telling me, no, of course you come back together. This is just temporary. This is like God's elaborate plan to make you come back together again, but in a better way, because you will both have worked on yourself. And this was so convincing. I thought it was my intuition. I thought it was divine guidance. And then my conscious, rational mind was like, what are you even thinking? Are you crazy? Of course it's over. You're here. It's been a year. It's been like 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 12 months. What the hell are you thinking? You're discussing about, the practical stuff and, dividing the shared financial assets and shipping my stuff over and all these things. Like, what are you even thinking? You're crazy. But it would always come back. I would have a major breakthrough and grieving and release, and then something new would come into my life. I would start a new thing. I would meet new people, and I like clockwork, after a few weeks, boom, it would come back. That crazy hope and illusion and magical thinking, and I think even quite a delusion of, no, we come back together. We come back together. We come back together. And it was so strong, it would drive me mad. I really thought I was going mad because it felt so real, and I made the big mistake to pull oracle cards. If you're into that, in that kind of situation, please don't. Because it will just show you what you want to hear. It will reflect back at you what's in your field. In my case, it was that hope that we come back together and kind of being convinced about it, at least that part of me, and it would show me that. And this one part in me was happy, like, yeah, reunion, yeah, love and partnership, or whatever the court said. But this other, more aware part was like, what the fuck is this? This is not true. So I had these two parts fighting within me, and I thought I was going mad. I really thought I was going insane, and it was looping and looping and looping. And every time I moved in a good direction, I made good choices for myself and my future, boom, it would come back. And luckily, I did not act on it. Luckily, I didn't just fall for it blindly. I questioned it, and I looked at it, and I sat with it. And a few months ago, what finally came up was that inner child part, that infant part of this primary attachment rupture, this 2-year-old me. I saw her basically the entire time. I was like emotionally, oh my God. I mean, I was just crying and I was very aware of her. And then I started, because I had already so much experience within a child healing for over a decade. Luckily, I knew what to do. So I was basically visualizing her, me, that baby me, and rocking her in my arms. And I mean, it sounds stupid, but it really helps. Like, I took a pillow, like this bed has many pillows, and I pretended it's me, it's that infant. And I rocked her in my arms, and I put her on my shoulder, and I saw myself, really how I looked like, with like very dark hair and curls and big brown eyes and a pacifier in the mouth, and wearing like this weird old school sleeping bag onesie with her big teary eyes. And I mean, it almost makes me emotional now, because I felt so much love and compassion for her. And I told her over and over how much she's loved. And I tried to explain what happened, and that it's not her fault, and that she's safe now, and that I'm here, and that she will never, ever be alone ever again, because I'm always here now. I'm always with her, and she's so safe with me, and she's so loved. And I did that over and over for probably weeks, like days and days and days. I fell asleep with that with that pillow in my arms, hugging it, like visualizing it's me as that infant. And over and over and over, I reassured her that this will never happen again, that she's not gonna die, that I am here now, that I will never abandon her ever again. And slowly, she started to trust me, and then that part could integrate. And now I know that she basically merged back into my core self, into my core adult self. So she's not an exiled part anymore, that when in a situation where there is a trigger, that she basically shows herself and reacts and runs the show. And that's the moment when you look around and you're like, what's happening with me? Why am I like this? Why am I reacting like this? Why am I so scared or so angry? That's because whatever happened to you, I don't know the exact thing, but you probably have that extremely terrified, very young inner child part in you that acts up. So please, please, please look at a possible attachment trauma that you might have before you get yourself into the next relationship, before these patterns can come up. Because also usually when we're not really healed, when we have these traumas, wounds, and patterns, then we attract people with a similar wound, with a similar trauma, with the matching insecure attachment style, like avoidant and anxiously attached go together really well. And it just creates so much pain. And I'm not saying that all relationships are completely doomed where there is an insecure attachment style or where there's attachment trauma. It does not have to be. Because what was the case with my relationships, and especially the last one, and that's my experience, that usually when you have this kind of unhealed trauma, complex developmental attachment, then there is codependency. There are savior and rescuer and victim patternings. There could be, there could be power dynamics. There could be enmeshment. All these things that I did not know and that I would never have thought that I had with my now ex. But on the soul level, very, very, very highly likely there will be a karmic connection to that person. It's highly likely that you had lifetimes after lifetimes with that same soul where there were similar things playing out. In my case, in our case, with my ex, and that's why it felt so unbearable to lose him. It was not just because of that attachment trauma. It was because of a deep soul and deep karmic connection that we shared. And I've done years and years and years of, past life regressions and stuff like that, where I saw lifetime after lifetime where we lost each other. There was a deep love. And in most of these lifetimes, we were together, we were a couple, and sometimes we had children, sometimes not, but always something bad happened. Because there was always a somewhat rupture, a persecution, an exiling, a war, whatever, where one or both of us were just like taken or killed. And I lost him over and over and over again. And there was never closure. There was never closure. So the thing I was scared of the most this time also was closure. I just couldn't handle it. I think that played into that illusion of we come back together too, because the thought of closure was just impossible. It was impossible because of that deep, deep pain of lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of having lost him, of having lost the same soul in different versions of different people. So a karmic relationship with karmic patterns playing out at the same time as on a psychological, emotional level, matching attachment, trauma, matching woundings, matching trauma responses, trauma patterns. That is really heavy. And I mean, I really want to encourage you to look at yourself and to start to do the healing work before you start the next relationship and before any of this might play out again. I mean, for me, this pattern had played out my entire life since I was 14 until I'm talking 30 years of nonstop, one relationship to the next, one heartbreak, abandonment, loss after the other. It was excruciating, really. And this is another thing I want to briefly mention, that when I hit rock bottom last summer, I was so alone. I thought I was going crazy. I was grieving. Then I had the hope illusion thing coming up. I really thought I was going mad, and I had no one. Then luckily, someone told me about 12 Steps meeting here. And I started to go to 12 Steps meeting. That was first ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholic or Dysfunctional Families. Then there's CODA, there is Codependents Anonymous, and then SLAW, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And I started to do step work in SLAW because I was convinced I had a love addiction. And from that angle, it was true. Because I had one relationship after the other since I was 14 years old, and I could not be alone. I just couldn't be alone. So of course I had one partner after the other. And even the 3 years where I was officially single, 14 years ago, when I left Germany and my old life behind and I started traveling, and then I moved to Thailand and became a scuba dive instructor. These 3 years, I was constantly with someone. I mean, I constantly had one guy after the other. Not like a real long-term relationship, but shorter ones, affairs, everything. Because that part in me was still running the show. She was so terrified of being alone. So that part also accepts basically anyone. It's not very picky. And the more drama, the more intensity, the better. You know, I mean, again, it depends on your specific situation, on your specific wounding, on your specific attachment pattern, on your specific mother or father wound and how that plays out. But usually there is intensity involved. There's a drama involved. There's a push-pull dynamics involved. There is I need him, but I cannot be with him, like this constant. You cannot be apart, but you cannot really be together. And that very, very much correlates with the karmic level on the spiritual or on the soul level. That usually there is an unfinished karmic pattern playing out. And usually then all it needs is closure. And usually we make these soul contracts, these karmic contracts with these other souls, other people involved, that this time we can finish it. What could not be finished all these lifetimes. And that usually means closure and making peace and moving on and letting go. I mean, this is so hard. This is so hard to when there is a karmic, strong connection and even a soul connection, and then there is attachment trauma. And it's so, so hard. I know it was for me. And I really, if you are in a situation like that, my heart goes out to you because I know how hard it is. It's very difficult. And I send you so much love. But I also want to tell you that you can absolutely heal this. I did. And it was hard. And I was really alone. Apart from going to the 12 Steps meeting where I could share things and I was listened and I was witnessed without people trying to fix me or give me advice. So that was very healing. And that alone, if you have no one, or you can't afford a therapy, or you have no healthy, loving friends or I don't know, people around you that can help you and support you, then at least try to go to these meetings because at least you can talk. You can say these things. You can talk and you can get it off your chest and you are heard. And that helped me a lot. But at some point, it didn't resonate with me anymore because I understood I'm not a love addict, at least not anymore. And that level that didn't resonate with me anymore because I knew it was that attachment trauma. It was that inner infant. There were other things to it, okay? I'm not getting into this right now. There was trauma with my father involved when he died that played into it. But at the core of everything was that attachment trauma when I was an infant. And as soon as I saw that and I felt it and I integrated her, and again, that's just really just a few months ago, it was gone. Like, magically, basically from one day to the next, and I swear to God, it's true. The hope, the crazy making hope and thoughts of maybe we are meant to come back together, the magical thinking, the fantasy, all of that was gone. It was just gone. I knew it was over because she was integrated into my core self, and my adult core self, rational mind, logical thinking was back online, and I was in control again. So that's how I healed the root cause of that attachment trauma, which was the not only, but the main reason for all my relationship dramas, for all the breakups, the being left over and over and over again, starting the next one, to not have to feel the grief. And especially for this part in me that just couldn't be alone. She needed a new attachment figure. So every time I had a partner, they basically stepped into that primary attachment figure position. And then that part in me started to be really clingy, really needy. And that alone will kill any normal, supposed to be normal or healthy relationship. I can tell you that. So yeah, attachment trauma, number one reason for problems in relationships and maybe even their ending. So please, 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 please look at your attachment styles, possible attachment trauma, start to do the inner child healing. This is just so important, and the reparenting. And look at the karmic level too. Could there be a karmic connection to this person? You can always choose to end a karmic vow, a contract, a relationship. I release this person lovingly and in peace to their own path, and I release myself into mine with freedom and love and forgiveness. You can write it on a piece of paper. You can burn it. I'm going to make a separate video about all of that. But this doesn't have to go on forever and ever and ever. You're not doomed. You have the power to stop this. You have the power to heal everything. You have the power to say, no, from now on, I will change this. I can't live like this anymore. I'm going to take my power back. I'm going to take my sovereignty back. I take responsibility for my healing. So this is just very, very, very important. Yeah, and that's basically it for today. I really hope that you got something out of it. Let me know in the comments if you're in a situation like that. And if you already know that you might have attachment trauma or insecure attachment style or anything like that. And I send you so much love. And I think this is one of the hardest things to look at. This is one of the hardest things to start healing. So you're very, very, very brave, very courageous. And I want that you give yourself some credit for that. Because it's not easy. It's not easy. And most people prefer to just stay in that, to just numb out, to continue with the addictions and the patterns and the unconscious behavior and all of that. And I did for a long, long, long time, for over 30 years of my life. I know exactly how it is. It's not easy. And I was dragged onto this path, kicking and screaming. I did not do that voluntarily. I really didn't. Things had just to become so, so, so bad until I started doing something about it. So don't let it pile up like that. Don't let it become that bad. You can change something right now just by making a choice. So I send you so, so much love. So much love. Have a great day. Bye-bye.